Welcome back to English BookCast, and today we're diving into the Fawcett expedition. That's by Brian Fawcett.
Yeah, if you enjoy these deep dives with us, be sure to join the English Bookcast channel and share it around to help us grow.
Absolutely. So in this deep dive, we'll be looking at Brian Fawcett's compilation of his father, Percy Harrison Fawcett's, writings about his exploration, his, obsessive search for a lost civilization in the Amazon.
Right.
And we're going to be looking at Brian's compilation of Percy's manuscripts, letters, diaries, records.
The whole thing.
The whole thing, to unpack this extraordinary story and try to understand what drove Fawcett into the unknown.
Yeah, I think a good place to start would be to understand the early life and the motivations of P.H. Fawcett.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that really stood out to me when reading this was Fawcett's weariness, I guess you could say, of modern civilization.
Yeah.
And this longing for something more, something untouched
Right.
by the rapid changes of the early 20th century.
Yeah, there's a sense, and Brian highlights this in his compilation, that Fawcett felt like something had been lost.
Yeah.
In the name of progress.
Right.
And that yearning for the untamed, the undiscovered, was really amplified by an elderly friend's manuscript detailing a lost civilization.
Yes, the manuscript. Yeah, this is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it seems to have ignited something specific in Fawcett's mind.
Right.
What was it about this manuscript that made it resonate so much with him?
Well, I think this manuscript seemed to confirm an intuition that he already had,
Right.
And that, combined with some of his own explorations and the local legends that he'd heard, really, really solidified his conviction that advanced ancient civilizations did at one point exist in South America.
Okay.
So it wasn't just a, romantic notion.
Right.
He really felt like he was rediscovering a lost chapter of human history.
Right. And this leads us to his initial expeditions to Bolivia, which the map in Brian's compilation is very helpful in visualizing these areas that he was exploring.
Yeah.
The expeditions of 1906, 07, 1910, 11, and 13.
Yeah.
So when we look at this map, what stands out to you about the locations and the scope of these early journeys?
Yeah, well, you can see that he covers a significant amount of geographical area.
Yeah.
And while officially many of these expeditions were commissioned, as Brian points out, for surveying and boundary demarcation purposes, there was always this underlying pursuit of archaeological mysteries.
Okay.
Right? So these surveying trips, provided a legitimate framework and funding, but his real passion was to uncover evidence of these lost civilizations.
So these surveying missions for him weren't just about lines on a map.
Yeah.
It sounds like they were opportunities to search for something more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you say boundary demarcation, what exactly does that mean? What kind of work would that have involved?
Yeah, so boundary demarcation at that time, involved physically surveying and marking the borders between territories.
Right.
And often this meant going into areas where very few Europeans had been before.
Okay.
Encountering indigenous populations, observing the landscape, and potentially even finding unusual artifacts or hearing local stories about these lost civilizations.
Right. So he had a very, very specific lens through which he was viewing his expeditions.
Absolutely.
So every interaction, every unusual finding must have felt like a piece of the puzzle to him.
Right. And these early experiences in Bolivia were very influential in his thinking, in solidifying those beliefs.
Yeah,
because Brian talks about how he had encounters with unusual artifacts and heard local accounts of these fabled lost cities.
Right.
So can you give us a sense of what some of those encounters were and how they fueled this conviction of his?
Yeah. Give me some examples.
Well, there are accounts of intricately carved stones being found.
Yeah.
The craftsmanship of which seemed far beyond the capabilities of the people living in the area at the time.
Right. Yeah.
And he also talked to locals who told him stories of these ancient cities hidden deep within the jungle,
Right.
often of immense size and very sophisticated architecture.
Right.
So while a skeptical observer might just dismiss these as legends or misinterpretations, for Fawcett, these accounts, coupled with the artifacts he found, were tangible evidence that he was on the right track.
Right. And this puzzle, as we've talked about, increasingly took the shape of this concept he called Z.
Right.
This became an unwavering focal point for his later expeditions.
Yeah.
So what exactly was Z for Fawcett?
Z was Fawcett's name for a major lost civilization.
Right.
It wasn't just a lost city. He envisioned a sprawling urban center, possibly even a network of cities, located somewhere in the Mato Grosso region of Brazil.
Okay.
And he theorized that this civilization predated all known South American cultures and had advanced knowledge and a sophisticated social structure.
Okay, so he was looking for something pretty huge.
Yeah, something massive.
Okay. Brian also highlights Fawcett's references to ancient maps and legends.
Yeah.
It seems like he was trying to ground his beliefs in a wider body of evidence, however unconventional.
Right.
So what kind of maps and legends was he drawing on?
Well, there were older maps of South America that had intriguing references to settlements.
Right.
Though they were vague in their placement.
Right.
And then there were local indigenous legends passed down through generations that spoke of great cities built by people who had vanished.
Right.
So Fawcett interpreted all this as corroborating evidence for Z.
I see.
But it's important to note that the scientific community at the time was very skeptical of these sources and the way he was interpreting them.
Right. They weren't buying it.
Yeah.
But despite all this skepticism, he made persistent efforts to secure funding and organize expeditions to find Z. What does this tell us about his character and the strength of his belief?
I think it speaks to his indomitable will, and the depth of his conviction. He faced so many setbacks, financial difficulties, constant criticism, yet he just kept going.
Yeah.
So this suggests to me that he was driven not just by adventure, but by a very deep belief that he was on the verge of making a monumental discovery.
Right.
That would rewrite history.
Right. So he wasn't just in it for the fame or the fortune.
No, not at all.
As we delve further into Brian's compilation of his father's writings, several key themes begin to emerge.
Right.
One of the most immediate is the challenge and the ever-present danger of Amazonian exploration at that time.
Yeah.
Brian really doesn't romanticize this aspect at all.
No, Brian paints a very realistic picture of these expeditions.
Yeah.
In fact, Fawcett's own writings go into great detail about the struggles with disease.
Right.
Malaria, beriberi fevers, you name it. The hostile environments, the jungle, the rivers, the wildlife.
Right.
And even the potential for hostile encounters with the indigenous people living there.
Right. Yeah, this was no walk in the park.
Not at all.
Another key theme that emerges is Fawcett's leadership style and the relationships with his companions.
Yeah.
What insights does Brian offer on this?
Well, we see how Fawcett leads and manages his teams.
Right.
He's very disciplined and expects a lot of resilience from his companions.
Okay.
There are glimpses of camaraderie, but also tension and disagreements, as you might expect in those conditions.
Right.
So yeah, not always straightforward and harmonious.
No.
And I think Fawcett's strong personality played a role in that.
Okay. Brian's compilation also sheds light on Fawcett's observations of the indigenous cultures that he encountered.
Yeah.
This is really fascinating. He seems to have had a genuine respect for their traditions and knowledge.
Right.
But also viewed them through this lens of his own theories about lost civilizations.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
Fawcett did record their customs, their languages.
Right.
Brian mentions all sorts of tribes like the Mirabeca, the Tupinambas, the Parabusu, the Pacajasnovas, the Chavantes, the Kuawaya, the Kalapalos, the Nahukua. I mean, it's a long list.
Yeah.
And he learned about their traditional knowledge.
Right.
But his belief in a shared ancient heritage and his search for this lost, maybe superior civilization did sometimes color his interpretation.
Right.
He was looking for echoes of this lost past in their present day cultures.
Yeah.
And that might not always be accurate.
Right. And running through all of this motif of lost treasures in advanced civilizations hidden deep within the jungle.
Oh, absolutely.
It's almost like this idea became the oxygen he breathed during his explorations.
It was central to his whole worldview.
Yeah.
Every unusual rock formation,
right,
every unexplained ruin, every legend he heard, it all just reinforced this idea of a hidden, glorious past.
And it wasn't just a passing thought. This was the narrative of his life.
Right.
That gave meaning to all the hardships he faced.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian's compilation also presents us with these really fascinating individual encounters and observations.
Yeah.
He records some really vivid descriptions of the Amazonian flora and fauna. What kind of things was he writing about?
Well, he was very meticulous in his observations.
Hmm.
He describes unique plant species, strange insects and animals that were pretty much unknown to Western science at that time.
Okay.
And these details not only paint this picture of this exotic environment, but also highlight his scientific background.
Yeah.
Even if his pursuits were a bit more esoteric.
Right. And then there are his interactions with the indigenous tribes, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The notes on their customs, their languages, their ways of life.
Yeah.
Were there any interactions that stand out in the book? There are quite a few, actually. He describes their hunting and fishing methods, their social structure, their spiritual beliefs.
Right.
There are descriptions of ceremonies and artistic expression.
Right.
And, we do need to remember these are his observations,
Right.
filtered through his own lens.
Yeah.
But they do provide some valuable first-hand accounts of indigenous life in the Amazon.
Right. The encounters with artifacts, like the basalt idol, which is illustrated in the book.
Yes.
This must have been pretty significant to Fawcett.
Oh, absolutely. The Bauxite idol became a real symbol for Fawcett.
Okay.
The craftsmanship, the material, the age of it, all suggested a sophisticated culture that existed long before Columbus. So
Right.
for him, it was proof.
Yeah.
Real physical proof of these advanced civilizations that he believed were out there.
Right. Right. Brian also details the immense physical hardships that Fawcett and his companions endured.
Oh, yeah.
Disease, insect infestations, difficult terrain, all of it.
It was brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, the book really conveys this constant battle against illness.
Right.
The insects, the humidity, the treacherous landscapes.
Right.
It took incredible mental and physical strength just to survive those expeditions.
Right. And it's also interesting to see Fawcett's views on the impact of European colonization.
Yeah.
Even though he's focused on these lost civilizations, he's not oblivious to what's going on around him.
Yeah, that's right.
What does he say about it?
Well, his writings show that he was concerned for the indigenous populations
Okay.
and recognized the disruption that colonization brought to their way of life.
Right.
So it gives us a more well-rounded picture of the man.
Yeah. So all of this context,
Mm-hmm.
his motivations, his belief in Z, the challenges, the encounters, all of this, it sets the stage for the final expedition in 1925,
Right.
which of course is shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, the expedition that disappeared.
Right. Brian documents this in detail. And we know that his companions on this journey were his son Jack and Raleigh Rymel.
A small team.
Yeah. So this was a personal expedition for him.
Oh, definitely.
His son joining him in the pursuit of this lifelong obsession.
Absolutely.
Brian lays out the planned route
Right.
as much as can be reconstructed.
Yeah.
And the last known communications received.
Right.
So what do we know about their intended path and these final messages?
Well, based on Brian's research and Fawcett's own notes,
Yeah.
the planned route took them deep into uncharted territories of the Mato Grosso.
Right.
And the final messages are brief. They offer very few details about where they were or their exact plans.
Right.
But, knowing what happened, those messages carry a real weight to them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And of course, that leads to the enduring mystery of their disappearance.
Right.
Brian's book explores the various theories that have emerged over the decades, attempting to explain what might have happened to Fawcett, Jack, and Raleigh.
Right.
What are some of the main possibilities?
Well, there's the possibility of accidental death, due to disease or encounters with dangerous animals or maybe conflict with some indigenous tribe.
Yeah.
Some theories even suggest they got lost and just succumbed to the environment.
Right.
The lack of any real evidence and
Yeah.
the remoteness of the region has just allowed all these possibilities to flourish.
Right, right. And so as we wrap up our deep dive into the Fawcett expedition, we've really looked at the core elements of Brian's compilation.
Yeah.
Percy's motivations, his unwavering belief, the challenges he faced, and this unresolved mystery of his final journey.
Right.
What's so fascinating about this story is it taps into this human fascination with lost civilizations,
Yeah.
with the daring nature of exploration,
Right.
and the enduring mystery of it all.
Absolutely.
And It makes you think about that line between scientific pursuit and unwavering belief.
It's a blurry line sometimes.
Yeah. And how the mysteries of the past continue to kind of beckon us today
Yeah.
to those uncharted territories of both geography and history.
That's right. So, we'll leave you with this thought. What other unexplored regions or historical enigmas really capture your imagination? What is it about the unknown that resonates with us so deeply?
Yeah.
Fawcett's story, as told by Brian, really shows us the allure,
Yeah.
but also the potential consequences of that very human drive to explore.
Absolutely.
So go out there and find your own Z.
Right.
Explore those mysteries.
Be careful out there.
But be careful, yeah.
All right. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Fawcett expedition. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
See you next time.